There's a town in the hills of Tuscany where time has never moved. Not once. Not for centuries. Every clock there is frozen. Every road loops back to the same square. And the people? They smile like they've met you before, even when they haven't. No map shows Montelupo. No GPS can track it. But those who find it never forget it. Some say it's cursed. Others say it's waiting for something or someone. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is the story of a place that broke time itself, and the man who came back to remember it. They told me Montelupo was just a sleepy town in the hills of Tuscany. Quiet, peaceful, a place where nothing much happened. But from the moment I arrived, I knew something was wrong. The first thing I noticed? Every clock had stopped, and no one seemed to care. I came to Montelupo out of curiosity. Not the tourist kind, not for pasta, not for vineyards, not for sunshine and cobblestone postcards. I'm what some people call an urban explorer. I chase ruins, I sleep in abandoned sanatoriums, I walk through forests with more whispers than birds. I follow forums where strangers post grainy photos and stranger legends, stories that most would laugh off. But Montelupo came up more than once. A town that doesn't appear on most maps. A place where no one seems to die, bridge, or leave. It took me 3 buses, 2 trains, and a ride in a tractor, yes, a literal tractor, to get there. And when I finally stood at the edge of the village, something in the air shifted. The wind didn't blow. The birds didn't chirp. Even the leaves on the trees seemed suspended, mid-drift, like the air itself was waiting for something. The welcome sign at the entrance was cracked, covered in ivy. It simply read, Benvenuti a Montelupo. Welcome. Beneath it, carved faintly into the wood, were 3 words in Latin, tempus non fluit. Time does not flow. I thought it was cute at first, like a tourist slogan. But once I stepped past that sign, my watch stopped. Just clicked to 12:47 and froze. My phone? Even though I charged it full just that morning. The town looked perfectly preserved, ancient stone houses, clay rooftops, a fountain in the center square, and a bell tower rising tall behind the chapel. But there were no children playing, no cars, no smoke from chimneys, just silence and the occasional low toll of the bell, though it didn't seem tied to any hour. I wandered toward the square, expecting to find a few curious faces. What I found was stranger. There were people, sitting on benches, sweeping the steps, hanging laundry, but they moved slowly, not like the elderly, not like people tired or sick. It was like every movement was being acted out underwater. They spoke in hushed voices, slow and melodic, like every word was being weighed before release. Their eyes followed me with mild curiosity, but not alarm, like I was just another stranger passing through, though their village had supposedly been forgotten for decades. I greeted an older man reading a newspaper on a stone bench. He smiled politely but didn't answer. The paper he held was yellowed. I looked at the date, 1961, and yet, he flipped the pages like it was today's edition. I continued walking, trying not to let the growing tightness in my chest turn into panic. I reached the town hall, which looked abandoned. Ivy had taken over the shutters. The doors creaked open, but inside, clean, tidy, as if someone had just dusted. A large grandfather clock stood in the corner, its hands at 3:17. I stood there watching it for a full 5 minutes. It didn't move, not even a tremble. I took out my phone again. Still dead. Tried turning on my flashlight. Nothing. I walked to the chapel next. The wooden doors were open. Inside, candles burned low. But there was no wax dripping. No smoke curling upward. Just stillness. At the altar stood a priest. I didn't hear him approach. He was just suddenly there, facing me with kind eyes and a voice that seemed far away when he spoke. "You're early," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For the memory to return," he whispered, and then turned away, kneeling before the crucifix and resuming his silent prayer. That was when I heard the first laugh. A child's laugh, faint, like wind in a tunnel. I turned sharply, but no one was behind me. Just an old doll lying in the pew, porcelain and cracked, one glass eye staring up. I left the chapel quickly, my footsteps too loud in the quiet. Back in the square, the sun was already beginning to sink, but it felt like I'd only been in the village for 20 minutes. I decided to leave, chalk it all up to one of those strange places that legends grow around. I told myself I'd return with better equipment, maybe a guide, maybe someone who spoke better Italian. But when I started walking, the road twisted back toward the fountain. I turned around, tried the opposite path. Same thing. After 3 attempts, I realized something terrifying. Every road, every alley, every street led back to the town square. Boys. I passed the same bakery 3 times. The same carved door with ivy growing in the shape of a serpent. And the same woman, olive skin, dark hair and braids, walking past me, carrying a basket of lemons. 3 times. Same smile. Same blink. Like a looped video. I ran. Took a side alley through crumbling walls and overgrown roots. Climbed a hill that looked like it led to the forest. But at the top, there it was, Montelupo again. The bell tower looming. The still fountain. The woman with the lemons, now walking past again. I screamed for help. No answer. Just the tolling of the bell, once deep and hollow, echoing down my spine. That was when I realized I hadn't seen the sun move once since I arrived. It just hovered above the hills, stuck in a golden hour that never shifted. The shadows didn't grow. The light didn't dim. I sat down on the steps of the fountain, heart racing, mouth dry. I looked at the water, still as glass. And there, in the reflection, not my face, but someone else. A boy. Staring at me. When I turned around, no one was there. Something about this place wasn't just off. It was wrong. I'd been in haunted hospitals, abandoned mental asylums, even spelunked caves said to be cursed by old Roman spirits. But this was different. It didn't feel like a haunting. It felt like something had paused the world here, like time itself had exhaled and never inhaled again. The locals still moved. They smiled. They breathed. But their eyes had that distant, washed-out look, like they were watching life from behind a veil. I spoke to a young man selling fruit. He told me his name was Antonio. He had a kind face. Said he'd lived here all his life. I asked him how old he was. 23, he said. How long have you been 23? He thought about it, then shrugged. I stopped counting after the 60th harvest. What year is it? He stared off. Sometimes it's 1912. Other times it's 1995. Depends on who you ask. I walked back to the main street and saw the church again. The doors were now closed, but I could hear faint music coming from within. A music box melody, distant, sad, like a lullaby sung at the end of the world. I needed to leave. I needed to break the loop, but I didn't know how. That night, I found a small guest house, empty, but the sheets were folded, candles lit, as if they'd been waiting. I collapsed into bed, but I couldn't sleep. The ticking, or rather the absence of it, was louder than sound. My body felt wrong. My skin itched. My thoughts spiraled. What if I was already part of the loop? What if I'd been here before? I dreamed of the boy from the reflection. He whispered something, but his mouth moved in reverse. The stars outside the window pulsed, not twinkled, pulsed, as if syncing with a heart not of this world. I woke up to silence. Not morning. Not night, just that golden light. I packed my bag and walked toward the edge of the village again. Past the schoolhouse, past the old cafe, past Rosa, the woman with the lemons, still smiling, still walking. The welcome sign was there, ivy covered, but something had changed. The Latin inscription was gone, replaced by a word burned into the wood. Remember. I turned around, and the town square was behind me again. And then, the bell rang once more. But this time, it was followed by a second toll. For the first time since I arrived, something had changed. The clocks hadn't started again, but something else had. Something was awakening. And I knew Montelupo had noticed me. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was part of the story. And stories don't let go easily. She wore a gold pocket watch around her neck, heavy, ornate. Its chain laced through the folds of a hand-woven shawl. The glass was cracked but clean, and the time was frozen at exactly 3:17. She stood beneath the bell tower as if she belonged to it, as if she'd been carved from the same stone. I hadn't heard her approach. No one ever seemed to approach in Montelupo. They were just there, like thoughts that surfaced uninvited. "You should have come last century," she said, her voice clear and ageless. "We had a post office then." The words settled into me like snow, soft at first, but bitter and cold once they touched the bone. I blinked, unsure if she was joking, hallucinating, or both. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that seemed too much of the world to ever be wide again. Her name was Rosa. She looked no older than 30, with olive skin and eyes that held centuries in them, not in their wrinkles or tiredness, but in their patience. She carried herself with the stillness of someone who had nothing left to prove and nowhere to be. A living statue, sculpted in the hour between now and never. She told me to walk with her. I didn't question it. In Montelupo, everything told you to listen, not by force, but by atmosphere. The wind carried old music. The stones beneath your feet seemed to hum. Every breath I took felt like I was inhaling a secret I didn't yet deserve to know. As we walked the narrow alleyways of the town, Rosa spoke of the past as if it had only just left the room. "Johnny used to run the bakery down on Via della Font," she said. "He made apricot tarts every Thursday, even when the harvest failed, even when he lost both sons to the flood. He said grief needed sugar." There was no bakery on that road now, just a hollow building with vines swallowing its windows. But I could almost smell the warmth she spoke of, taste the memory she carried. "You said I should have come last century," I asked. "How long have you been here?" She paused, her gaze drifting upward toward the unmoving sun. "I was born in 1896, she said finally. I looked at her again. Skin clear, hair dark. Her hands showed a hint of age, perhaps, but not enough to bear the weight of over 100 years. "That's not possible," I said. "In Montelupo it is," she replied. "But I suppose you already know that." My watch still hadn't moved. My phone was a dead rectangle in my pocket. And the church bell, rusted and crooked, echoed every morning at precisely 6 a.m., though no one wound it, no one rang it. "Not anymore. Time's a guest here," Rosa continued. "It came once, lingered, then we made it stay." Her phrasing chilled me. Time didn't linger, to move. It pressed forward like a river. It rotted, it renewed. But in Montelupo, it had been captured and caged. I asked her if anyone had tried to leave. She didn't answer immediately. She ran her fingers along the edge of her pocket watch, then clicked it open. The inside was lined with faded photographs, black and white, faces I didn't recognize. One of them might have been her as a child. "I had a brother once," she said. "He was younger, restless. He wanted to leave, said the village was cursed, that we were prisoners of some spell. He tried the road, just like you did. He ran in circles until his shoes tore open and his feet bled. Then he screamed at the mountains. No one answered, not even the birds. What happened to him? He sleeps now," she whispered, "the kind of sleep where you forget you're alive." We stopped at a stone bench near the edge of the village square. I sat, exhausted, not from walking, but from the pressure in my head. The stillness was unnatural. There's a certain madness that creeps in when time doesn't pass, when you can't measure life. The days blend into one another like melted wax. No shadows move. No clouds drift. You begin to wonder if you're aging at all, or if the village has already swallowed your name and replaced it with silence. "I don't understand," I said. "Why Montelupo? Why here?" Rosa looked toward the bell tower. "Because he built time here, then locked it away." "Who?" "The watchmaker," she said. "Matteo Verano. He was more than a craftsman. He understood that time wasn't just a measurement. It was a force, a breath, a ghost, and he tried to trap it in gears." She stood, motioning for me to follow. "There's something you should see." As we walked deeper into the village, the houses grew older. Not in ruin, but in style. Carvings, arches, etchings of suns and moons above doorways. I saw a weathered mosaic of Saturn devouring his children, and beside it, etched into stone, the Latin phrase I'd seen at the village entrance, tempus non fluit. Time does not flow. We stopped before a small stone cottage half swallowed by ivy. The windows were shuttered, the chimney crooked. A wind chime hung by the door, made entirely of watch parts, gears, springs, rusted hands. No one talks about this place, Rosa said, but everything started here. The cottage of Matteo Verano, the man who built time. She pushed the door open. It creaked like a groan from something long buried. Inside, dust floated like ghosts. Clocks lined every wall. Some ornate, some broken, none ticking. I stepped carefully through the room, my boots disturbing a layer of dust thick enough to write memories in. There was a table covered in blueprints, parchment faded, edges burned. Diagrams of strange devices. Wheels within wheels. Symbols I couldn't read. Maps of stars. And at the center, always, a human silhouette with a clock for a heart. He believed, Rosa said softly behind me, that time was a loop, not a line. That it could be wound tighter, or released. That certain moments could be made to echo. On a nearby shelf, I saw a row of pocket watches, each one labeled with a name. I ran my finger along the engravings. Johnny, Francesca, Emilio, Rosa. I turned. Is this me? She nodded. He gave everyone a watch. Said we'd each hold a piece of the loop. If one of us ever left, it would unravel. And if all of you stayed, the village would never age, never die. Just pause. I stared at her, a deep ache settling in my chest. But why would he do that? Rosa's expression darkened. Because his son was dying, and he couldn't bear to lose him. The words fell heavy. Matteo Verano hadn't created a miracle. He'd made a mausoleum. He stopped time, I said, to stop death. He stopped everything, Rosa whispered, and in doing so, he made us all ghosts. I looked around the cottage. The clocks, the designs, the silence. What happened to him? No one knows. One day, he vanished, left his watch behind. The town kept going, or not going. Some accepted it. Others tried to fight it. Most forgot. Outside, the bell chimed once more. 6 a.m. again. Or still. I felt the weight of the air pressing down on me. Not with heat, but with the burden of knowing. Of finally seeing. This place, I murmured, is a tomb with windows. Rosa didn't reply. She walked to the hearth, reached behind it, and pulled out a faded journal. She handed it to me. His final notes, she said. No one reads them anymore. I opened the journal. The ink was faded, the language old, but the words trembled with obsession. Time is not a river. It is a noose. They will thank me when the stars forget to move. He will never die if he never grows. He will never grow if he never breathes another second. The entries became more erratic. Diagrams shifted into scribbles. Equations spiraled into drawings of eyes, clocks, and children weeping under an unmoving sun. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. I need to leave, I said. You can't, Rosa replied. I have to. She stepped aside, letting me pass. I understand, but remember this. Once you've seen the truth of time, it begins to see you back. I walked out into the dying light, clutching the journal. The sun hadn't moved. The shadows were identical. The woman with the lemons passed by again, same smile, same blink. But something felt different now. The weight of knowledge changes the gravity of places. I could feel the loop tightening, the air denser, the silence louder. And as I turned back to the cottage, Rosa was gone. But her pocket watch lay on the bench where she'd stood, still frozen at 3:17. And the second hand moved once, just once, then stopped again. The house was filled with clocks, dozens, hundreds. They hung from every wall, rested on shelves, stood tall in corners like sentinels keeping guard. They ticked not in unison, but in chaos, a dissonant orchestra of time tearing itself apart. Some spun forward too fast, some backward, some jerked like broken metronomes. But when I reached for the blueprints on the table, the sound died. All at once, the ticking stopped. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was pressure. A held breath. A warning. I stood in the heart of Matteo Verano's home, the legendary watchmaker whose name had been whispered in Montelupo like a spell and a curse. Rosa had led me here, though she hadn't followed me inside. The moment I stepped over the threshold, the village felt far away. I wasn't sure if time had frozen again or simply forgotten me. The blueprints were spread across a heavy oak table. They were brittle with age but meticulous, drawn with the care of someone who had loved every line more than he loved sleep. There were dozens of them, layered over one another like a mind unfolding. Diagrams of devices I didn't understand. Clock faces embedded in shapes that resembled the solar system. Spirals that looked like snails and galaxies at once. Human anatomy, hearts, eyes, spines, fused with gear systems. Beside them were notes, equations, verses in Latin. Pages stained with ink and something darker, something I hoped was just time but feared was blood. Matteo Verano had not merely built clocks. He had tried to rebuild the universe. I picked up a torn sheet, a detailed rendering of a device labeled Anima Spiralis, the spiral soul. The central figure was a boy, young, wide-eyed. His ribcage opened like a book, and inside, a pendulum swung from heart to navel. Beneath it were instructions written in Italian, barely legible, but the word eternita appeared again and again. Eternity. It was in that moment I realized this wasn't just about freezing time for Montelupo. Matteo had tried to preserve a single moment forever, not for the village, but for himself. A perfect second, a breath he couldn't let go of. And then I found the letters. They were tied with faded ribbon, brittle to the touch, dated 1902. One after the other, signed in the same script, Matteo Verano. I read the first with cautious reverence. To those who find this, know I have not gone mad. I have gone deeper. The world is not made of years or minutes. It is made of echoes. A man's life is not a line. It is a circle waiting to close. My son is the proof. He was dying, yes, but only in the way flowers die in winter. I have given him a spring that never ends. A season trapped in amber. A loop of light and heartbeat. The clocks must continue. They must hold the walls of this moment tight. If the pendulum breaks, the town breaks. If the town breaks, I break. The signature was bold, obsessive, almost frantic. I swallowed. My hands trembled. The boy in the blueprint wasn't just a concept. He was real. Matteo's son. The one Rosa had spoken of, the reason for Montelupo's stillness. The child for whom time had been caged. I read another letter. The villagers do not understand. They think I have cursed them, but they do not see the gift I've given. No death, no change, a world untouched by ruin. Why do they mourn what they have escaped? Some whisper rebellion. They say the clocks are unnatural. But what is nature? A storm? A plague? The slow rot of age? I have given them sanctuary. My machines hum with grace. My gears sing the music of stillness. But there is a cost. There is always a cost. And I will pay it again and again. I closed the letter, heart racing. Matteo hadn't just tampered with time. He had rewritten it, not with magic, but with design. With cogs, wires, theory, and pain. He had built a reality inside Montelupo and sealed it from the decay of everything else. A perfect snow globe of memory. But the snow never fell. The third letter was short. A single line, hurried and splattered. He wants to leave. I stared at it for a long time. Something groaned behind the walls. I turned. The fireplace, once cold and quiet, now hummed softly, not with heat, but with vibration. A low, mechanical thrum. I stepped toward it, brushed away the soot and dust, felt along the edges of the stone. Something gave a faint click, then another. The panel swung open. A hidden door. Behind it, narrow stairs wound downward in tight spirals. No light, just the faint scent of metal, old fabric, and something else. A smell that made my skin crawl, like copper and dried leaves. I descended slowly, my footsteps muffled. The air grew colder, denser. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with tiny boxes labeled in Mateo's handwriting, dates, names, coordinates of stars. Some shelves held tiny clock parts, suspended in jars of amber-colored liquid. At the bottom of the stairs was a small stone room, and in the center of it, a cot. On it lay the skeleton of a child. He was curled on his side as if in sleep, dressed in fine, old-fashioned clothes. His bones were thin, delicate. One hand rested across his chest, and there, around his neck, was a gold pocket watch. Still ticking. I fell to my knees. The sound echoed in the still chamber, sharp, clean, endless. Tick, tick, tick. This boy had been Mateo's son, the centerpiece of everything, the reason time had frozen. And yet he had died anyway. The watch had not saved him. The machines had not preserved him. But the illusion had. For the villagers, for Rosa, for Montelupo, the entire town had become a ghost of a single heartbeat, a desperate, grieving heartbeat, beating forever in a room no one knew existed. I looked closer. The boy's name was stitched into the collar of his shirt, Emilio. I whispered it aloud. The watch skipped. I stumbled back. The ticking continued, but the shadows in the room deepened. The gears on the walls began to shift. A clock embedded in the stone pulsed once, then stopped. And I understood then what Rosa had meant. Mateo hadn't locked time away. He had buried it with his son. This was the anchor, the wound, the moment that held Montelupo suspended, not by science or magic, but by grief so vast it tore the fabric of time itself. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to cry, to scream into the void. But nothing would come. Just silence. And the ticking. I reached toward the watch, hand trembling. The air around it buzzed. My fingers touched the surface, warm, impossibly warm. And all the clocks upstairs began to tick again. Not fast, not slow, but in unison. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. The chamber shook slightly. A gear popped from the shelf and shattered on the ground. I backed away. The village had felt me now. Whatever I'd done had disturbed the stillness. And Montelupo did not like to be disturbed. As I climbed back up the stairs, I could feel the house breathing. The clocks watched me. The air pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat hidden beneath the floorboards. Back in the main room, I saw that all the blueprints had rearranged themselves, as if the wind had shifted through a place without wind. On top of the pile was a single note. Unfolded. Some things were never meant to last. But I could not let him go. Forgive me, Mateo Verano. The clocks were silent again. I stepped outside into the golden light. The village stood unchanged. Rosa was gone. The streets were quiet. But in the air, something had shifted. The illusion was fraying. And somewhere behind the stillness, something was waiting to move again. He was the only child born in Montelupo in 300 years, and he tried to run. That was how Rosa began the story, in a whisper that seemed to come not just from her lips but from the stones beneath her feet, from the ivy curling along the chapel wall, from the ghosts that lived in the lightless hours of Montelupo's days. His name was Emilio, and he was Mateo Verano's son. Not adopted, not imagined. Flesh and blood, a miracle in a village where nothing was born and nothing ever died. I remember when he was born, Rosa said. The bell tower chimed 12 times even though it was morning. The fountain overflowed, though no one touched it. And for the first time since the clocks had stopped, something moved forward. I asked her how that was possible. How time, in a place suspended in an eternal loop, could allow life to form. She stared at the distant hills, her eyes glassy with a memory too heavy to carry. He wasn't meant to exist, she said. But sometimes, grief is strong enough to break even the laws it creates. She told me Mateo had been different after the loop was sealed. He was no longer the eccentric genius with gears in his pockets and galaxies in his eyes. He was a man unmoored, a father caught in a paradox of hope and despair. He had locked time into a perfect circle to preserve Emilio. But Emilio, impossibly, had been born afterward. A crack in the loop. A living contradiction. And with that contradiction came something Matteo hadn't anticipated. Emilio aged. Slowly, not like children elsewhere, but visibly. His legs grew longer, his eyes deeper, his questions sharper. While the villagers remained as they were, unwrinkled, unmoved, Emilio counted his birthdays by the inches on the doorframe and the loosening buttons of his shirts. Rosa said he was clever from the start. Not just intelligent, aware. Aware that something in Montelupo wasn't right. That the world he was born into didn't breathe like the world outside. That smiles were hollow. Conversations recycled. He would stare for hours at the people in the square, watching them repeat the same gestures, the same words, like dolls wound too tightly. I asked him once what he was doing, Rosa said. He looked at me and said, "They're not alive. They're remembering." By the time he was 12, or what passed for 12, he had already begun to test the boundaries of the village. He'd mapped every street, every hidden corner. He'd timed the bells, even though they no longer marked real hours. He'd watched the shadows, noticed how they never lengthened, how the sun sat like a painting in the sky. And most of all, he had found his father's blueprints. The same ones I had uncovered days earlier, the ones that blended flesh and metal, soul and spiral. Except Emilio saw them not as a legacy, but as a trap. He believed the loop wasn't just about time, Rosa said. He believed it had trapped destiny itself. That nothing could change because the blueprint had decided what was allowed to happen. And Emilio, born outside that design, was the only variable left. So he made a plan. He would escape Montelupo, break the loop, let the world breathe again. Rosa told me it began with whispers. Emilio asking questions no one wanted to hear, pushing at walls no one had touched in centuries. He tried the roads, of course, all of them, but they always bent back. Like the village refused to let him leave. He tried climbing the cliffs, disappeared for 3 days once. Rosa found him in the old bell tower, carving something into the stone with a rusted nail. "Let me age," it said. The elders grew nervous. Quiet meetings were held. Murmurs of unraveling. Matteo was nowhere to be found. Some said he had retreated beneath the cottage, to the place where the ticking never stopped. Others claimed he had vanished entirely, swallowed by the mechanism he'd built. Emilio, now 16, had grown colder, wiser, but also more afraid, because he had begun to hear things. Rosa said it started with the clocks. Whispers between ticks. Dreams of gears in his chest, turning in reverse. He would wake with bleeding ears, nose, mouth. He started writing frantically, journals filled with sketches of machines with teeth, of villagers with hollow eyes, of a sun that bled light like ink. And then one day he disappeared. Gone. His room left untouched. His bed unmade. The blueprint he'd been working on, half burned in the fireplace. Rosa found only one thing on his desk, a cassette tape, labeled in crooked handwriting. "They're not people anymore." I found the tape years later, hidden behind a panel in the same bedroom. The same child-sized bed, the same view of the frozen fountain. I brought an old recorder, batteries wired to an external power source since nothing charged in Montelupo. I pressed play. The voice that came through was raw. Tired. Not a child's voice anymore, but not yet a man's. It trembled between courage and grief. If you're hearing this, it means the loop hasn't broken. Or maybe it has. I don't know anymore. I don't even know if I'm still real. There was a pause. Breathing. A sound like something brushing the microphone. They're not people anymore. Not really. They're echoes. Memories trying to pretend they're flesh. I see it now. Every smile's the same. Every step rehearsed. Even Rosa. She remembers who she was, but she doesn't know who she is now. They're trapped. All of them. And I'm the fracture. I tried to fix it. I tried to burn the blueprints, to break the pendulum. But the village wouldn't let me. The roads bend. The stars lie. The wind whispers my name in my own voice. I think I'm becoming part of it. And I'm scared. A long silence followed. Then, just before the tape clicked to a stop, one last whisper. "If you ever find a way out, don't look back." I sat there in that room for what felt like hours. The air was heavy, thick with something unspoken, as if the walls had absorbed Emilio's fear and now exhaled it in slow, mournful breaths. I imagined him here, alone, fighting against a force no one else could see. A boy born into stillness, trying to make the world move, and failing. But his voice had reached me, somehow, across years that didn't pass, through the bones of a village that refused to die. Rosa stood in the doorway when I turned. "He didn't escape," I said. She shook her head. "No, but he didn't disappear either." "What happened?" Her eyes were wet. "He made a choice. He stepped into the mechanism, the one his father built. Said if he couldn't leave, he'd try to understand it. From the inside." I remembered the skeleton in the chamber, the ticking watch. That hadn't been Mateo's son. That had been the first child. But Emilio, where is he? I asked. Rosa didn't answer. She stepped aside, motioning for me to follow. We walked through Montelupo in silence. The villagers didn't turn their heads. The bell rang once as we passed, though the sun hadn't moved. She led me to the base of the bell tower. The door was locked, but Rosa placed her hand on the stone, whispered something I didn't catch. And it opened. Inside, stairs spiraled upward. Dust clung to every step. The air was cold, unmoving. We climbed. At the top was a room I hadn't seen before. Narrow, empty, except for a single chair. And in the chair, a boy. Eyes closed, breathing shallow. Tubes, ancient, rusted, somehow still functioning, ran from his arms into the walls, into the gears. His chest rose and fell. Once every minute. Emilio, he hadn't escaped. He had become the anchor. He is the pendulum now, Rosa said quietly. The moment that keeps the loop turning. But why? Because he chose to bear what his father created. To carry the burden so the village wouldn't rot completely. Without him, everything would collapse. Why not end it? She looked at me. Because too many of us are too afraid of what comes after time. The boy stirred just slightly. His lips moved, but no sound came. And then one of the gears on the far wall twitched. Just once, then stopped. Montelupo had felt me again, and it was waiting. There's a painting in the mayor's office, tucked behind dusty ledgers and old municipal seals, that shows a day Montelupo will never forget. A strange canvas, dark and cracked with age, its brushstrokes deliberate, painful, almost ritualistic. The image is simple, the village square under a golden sky. But the sun doesn't shine. It hovers, frozen above the bell tower, a white, unblinking eye. And the shadows? They don't stretch. They burn, scorched silhouettes etched into the earth like ashborn scars. In the center stands a man, hands raised, eyes closed. A ring of villagers kneeling around him, all facing outward as if warding something off or inviting it in. That painting marks the beginning. The mayor's name is Orso Bellini. Tall, worn down by silence more than age, he speaks with the weary cadence of someone who's carried too many years without ever leaving the same room. I met him in what once served as Montelupo's administrative hall, though nothing official had happened there in centuries. Still, the room was pristine. Like everything else in the village, it resisted decay not through effort, but because time itself had lost interest. You're not the first to ask about the painting, Orso told me, but you may be the first to actually understand what it means. He poured me tea, though neither of us drank it. He said the date was August 5th, 1702, a day that still lived behind every smile in Montelupo. Not because they remembered it, but because they still lived it. It was meant to be a blessing, he said, a ritual of preservation. We were farmers then, simple folk, superstitious. That year, the summer had turned against us. Drought, plague, crops rotting before harvest. The vines curled like fists. The wheat stood hollow. And the mayor at the time, my great-great-grandfather, turned to something older than prayer. He paused, then gestured to a cabinet. Inside were journals. Dozens, bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed by dust rather than age. Each one written by a mayor, passed down not as history, but as penance, he handed me the entry for August 5th. I read it aloud. Today we make our offering. 12 kneel. 1 leads. The tower will bind the season to its peak. The sun shall hold its place. The fruit will never spoil. The vines will never wither. And Montelupo shall never again fear the future. There were diagrams beside the writing, not of crops or rituals, but gears, machinery. At the center, again, was the Torre d'Orologio, the bell tower. I looked up. They used the tower as the ritual site? Orso nodded. It had been Matteo's before it was ours. Even then, he was building things no one understood. He said it was to harness rhythm, balance. But the blueprints, if you can call them that, were full of contradictions. Wheels inside wheels, levers that connected to stars, timepieces that ticked with no spring. But people were desperate. They believed in him. He was brilliant, and brilliant men are dangerous when they believe they're right. I asked him what happened that day. Orso stood slowly and walked to the window. The sky outside was still golden, just like the painting. No clouds, no shift. They climbed the tower, he said. 12 of them. Villagers chosen to represent each family line. And at the top stood Matteo. He held the crown of hours, a strange device. Part helm, part sundial, part mechanical cage. He wore it as the sun reached its highest point. The others knelt. And then, he trailed off. The sky cracked, he finally said. Not with lightning, but with silence. The wind stopped. The birds dropped from the air. Not dead, just still. Leaves froze mid-fall. The fountain stopped spilling. And then, he turned to face me. The sun didn't move. It just stopped. It hovered in place, never setting, never shifting. And the shadows beneath the tower, those nearest the ritual, didn't stretch with the hours. They burned into the ground. Black silhouettes that still mark the stones today, etched in a pattern no one dares trace. People celebrated at first, Orso said. They thought it worked. The wheat stayed ripe. The grapes didn't sour. But after a few days, no one felt tired. No one felt hungry. Days didn't pass. Children didn't grow. And the injured never healed, nor worsened. We had paused. He sat back down and stared at the cold tea. But something else had happened too, he said. Matteo was not among the 12 shadows. I frowned. What do you mean? He pulled another journal. This one thinner. Red wax seal broken. It's his. Matteo's last entry. Not long after the ritual. He handed it to me. I miscalculated. The anchor held. But it held too tightly. Time has not been preserved. It has been captured. The village lives inside a breath. I remain outside of it. Or beneath it. I am not sure anymore. The crown burns. It whispers in a voice that isn't mine. The sun watches. The sun listens. The sun remembers. I have hidden the final gear in the tower. If it turns, the breath may release. But it will cost us all. A loop once broken cannot be reformed. And there are things that have learned to live in the stillness. They are watching. There was a final line, carved into the bottom edge of the page, as if written in haste. Forgive me, Emilio. I looked up. The tower holds the final piece. Orso's face hardened. You mustn't climb that tower, he said. Not unless you're ready to disappear. The way he said it wasn't metaphor. It was fact. A known truth passed down like a warning carved into bone. I asked him why. Because the top of the tower doesn't belong to the village anymore, he said. It belongs to the moment. And the moment remembers everyone who ever tried to leave it. He told me others had climbed it. Over the centuries. Dreamers. Outsiders. Rebels. People who believed they could unstop the sun and restart the wind. Some never returned. Others came back, wrong. Smiling too wide. Eyes unfocused. Moving just a second too late, as if answering a question that had yet to be asked. They called it the time sickness, Orso said. A distortion of the soul. As if the body remembered time, but the mind did not. He showed me a name carved into the wall, near the door, almost hidden behind a curtain. Emilio Verano. I stepped back. He climbed it, I whispered. Orso nodded. When he was older, he wanted to see the gear. Said if he could understand it, he could stop it. But he didn't come back the same. After that, he disappeared into the mechanism. I thought of the boy in the chair. The tubes. The slow rise and fall of a chest trapped between heartbeats. He became the pendulum, I murmured. The village needed an anchor, Orso said. And he offered himself. The room was quiet now, except for the faint ticking. Somewhere nearby, a clock still ticked, though it shouldn't have. Orso looked toward the painting again. I was a child, he said softly. When my father showed me that painting, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "We live beneath a frozen star, and one day it will thaw, but it won't melt gently. It will fall like fire." Outside, the sun still clung to the same spot in the sky. Unmoving, unblinking, but it felt closer somehow, as if it had leaned forward, watching. I left the office in silence, and as I walked through the square, I stepped carefully around the 12 burned shadows in the stones. They were still there, frozen, forever kneeling, forever waiting. And I knew then that the day the sun froze was not just the beginning of Montelupo's stillness. It was the moment the village stopped being a place and became a prison for time itself. It wasn't just a bell tower. It was a machine humming under stone, pulsing with rhythmless life, older than its bricks and hungrier than anything that could be built by hand. From the outside, the Torre d'Orologio looked harmless enough, weathered, quiet, overgrown with ivy that climbed its walls like time trying to take back what it had lost. But Montelupo had no accidents. Everything here was chosen, preserved, and the tower was at its center. Everyone warned me not to climb it. Rosa, with her quiet grief. Orso, with his heavy eyes. Even the villagers who barely spoke anymore. Their gazes lingered on the tower as if looking too long might summon something from within. But I had already seen too much. The boy in the chair. The letters. The painting of the sun that never moved. And I knew, somehow, that the answers weren't in the square or the chapel or even in Rosa's frozen watch. They were in the gears that turned beneath the bell tower. Or didn't turn. Or were waiting to. I waited until just before the bell was due to ring again. 6 a.m., though the sky never shifted. Montelupo was locked in golden light, where every morning felt like it had been painted once and then left to dry for 3 centuries. The door was chained but old. I pried the iron loose with a crowbar I'd taken from the smith's abandoned shed. It made a sound like something waking, not a scream, not a creak, but a long, yawning exhale. The kind you make when you've slept far too long. The air inside was cold, but not like night. Cold like cellars, like churches, like secrets. And the moment I stepped through the threshold, I felt it, the hum beneath the floor. Not a vibration, the pulse. As if the tower wasn't built on stone, but on something alive and dreaming. The staircase spiraled tightly, carved from smooth, dark stone that looked older than the rest of the village. There were etchings along the wall, half-worn, Latin verses, planetary diagrams, the Eye of Horus, the Ouroboros, and a dozen symbols I didn't recognize. Some weren't even human. The first chamber I reached was circular, domed. A mechanical heart of rusted brass and blackened iron. Ancient machinery clung to the walls, gears the size of wagon wheels, suspended chains, a pendulum so massive it nearly brushed the floor. Everything was still, but not silent. There was ticking, faint, inconsistent, like a cough in a crowded theater, sudden, then vanishing into the void. At the center of the chamber stood a mural, hand-painted, flaking but intact. It depicted a line of people, villagers, their faces unmistakably familiar, standing in a circle, each holding a gold pocket watch against their chest. Above their heads, the sky was cracked like glass, and from the watches bled streams of gold, not downward, but up, feeding a sun with a face that watched and wept. I stepped closer. Each watch was labeled with a name. I recognized some, Orso, Rosa, Johnny, the baker Rosa once mentioned. Even children, their hands too small for the watches they carried. But one figure stood alone at the center. A child. Emilio. His watch bled most of all. I reached out, and the mural warmed beneath my palm. Behind it, I heard something shift. A panel of the stone wall groaned and slid open, revealing another stairwell. This one led not up, but down. It spiraled in reverse. Where the first staircase had been carved with symmetry and balance, this one bent like a spine broken in too many places. The steps tilted inward. The walls narrowed. I had to duck as I descended. The deeper I went, the more the ticking returned. Louder now, less like time, more like breath. At the bottom, I stepped into silence. And into Montelupo. But not the Montelupo I knew. It was a replica. An exact mirror of the village above. The same streets. Same buildings. Same fountain. But the colors were gone. The air was gray. The walls bled moisture. And everything echoed, each footstep, each breath, as if the stone itself hadn't heard life in centuries. This was not a copy. It was a shadow, a ghost town beneath the living one. And it was empty. I wandered the streets, heart pounding, unsure if I was awake or had stepped into the village's final illusion. Every window stared back at me like a blind eye. The fountain was dry. The chapel doors hung open, the pews rotted. There were no birds, no bells. Only that same pulsing hum, deeper now. Almost a growl. I passed the bakery, the schoolhouse, even Rose's cottage. Each place was there, and yet strong, like memories forced into the shape of buildings. The bakery still had shelves, but they were warped, melted slightly at the edges. The blackboard in the school still held chalk words, but they shifted when I looked too long, letters curling backward, words unmaking themselves. In the center of the square stood a statue. I approached cautiously, boots scraping against ground that felt too soft, like flesh stretched thin over stone. The statue was of a boy, Emilio, but not the child I remembered from Rose's stories. This one was older, maybe 16, maybe 30, eyes hollow, mouth sewn shut with golden thread. His hands were outstretched, holding a broken watch that leaked dust into the air. At the base of the statue was a plaque. Time remembers. That phrase again. I turned. The bell tower loomed behind me, taller here than above. Its shape twisted, its peak lost in shadow. I heard a sound. Footsteps. Not mine. Slow. Careful. I froze. The air around me thickened. My breath came shorter. I turned toward the alley behind the statue. Nothing. But the steps continued. Always just one corner ahead, one street beyond. Never closer. Never farther. Like someone following the idea of me. I ran. Back through the streets, toward the tower. But it wasn't there. The square twisted. Streets moved. Doors opened where none had been. Montelupo shifted like a puzzle resisting completion. I realized, then, I wasn't just in the ghost village. I was being tested by it. But measured. This place was not just a replica. It was a simulation. A trial. And I had tripped some unseen wire by coming here. I stumbled into the chapel. Inside, a candle burned. One candle. In a place where nothing else moved. It cast shadows on the walls. Shadows of people who weren't there. They knelt. Raised hands. Repeated the motions of that original ritual. The one on August 5th, 1702. Over and over again, like film caught in a loop. But there was no sound. Only the watch. I turned and saw it, lying on the altar, ornate, identical to the ones I had seen in the mural. Except this one ticked. I picked it up. The second hand spun wildly, then stopped. Everything stopped. The shadows on the wall froze. The air thickened. Then, a voice, whispered from nowhere, or everywhere. You were not meant to see this. I dropped the watch. The whisper repeated, you were not meant to remember. And then, the bell, rang, twice, 3 times. The village shook. The statue in the square cracked. From its chest, a light, dim, but growing. Something stirred beneath the stones. The sky above, though gray and silent, flickered, like a film reel reaching its final frames. The hum became a roar, and I ran, back through the alleyways that no longer turned, but reached, pulled me forward with angles that defied logic. At the far end, the staircase waited. I climbed faster than I thought possible. Every step bringing me back to the spiral, back to the gears, back to the mural. And when I emerged once more into the first chamber, the mural had changed. The villagers still held their watches, but now their hands bled red, and the sun above them no longer wept. It smiled, hungry, eternal. I fled the tower, into Montelupo's still morning, the sky unchanged, the shadows fixed, but in my chest something pulsed in time with the watch I had dropped, and in my mind the replica village still echoed, waiting, watching, a perfect memory beneath the surface, ready to wake. The village underground was perfectly still, but then I saw someone move. It was me. I wasn't supposed to be back. After I fled the time tower, gasping with the weight of what I'd seen, the shadow mural, the shifting staircases, the hidden city beneath the village, I'd sworn I wouldn't return. But Montelupo doesn't open its secrets without demanding something in return. And somewhere beneath the golden stillness of the sun, I felt that hum again. Not just beneath the ground, but in my bones. I had seen the ghost version of Montelupo before, gray, silent, dry. But this time, when I returned to the hidden stairwell behind the mural and descended once more into the depths, something had changed. The air was colder, heavier. The hum was gone, and something new had taken its place. Breathing, not mine. The steps led back into the village replica. Same cracked stones, same warped walls, same statue of Emilio stitched with golden thread. But now there were footsteps in the dust. Not mine. Bare, dragging. As if someone had wandered without knowing why. This place wasn't just a shadow anymore. It had aged. The bakery's wood was rotted through. Mold crept along the schoolhouse. The vines on Rosa's cottage were black, withered. The water in the fountain was gone, but the stone was stained with something that looked like rust or blood dried in streaks. I stood in the center of the square and felt a presence, not just in the windless air, but watching. Then, movement. In the window of the mayor's replica hall, a silhouette. The shoulders hunched forward. It was a man. I approached slowly. As I did, he turned, and I saw my face. But older, hardened, bruised. One eye ringed purple, the other sunken, cheeks hollow, beard half-grown in patches of gray. His expression was familiar, too familiar, one I'd seen in hotel mirrors after sleepless nights chasing shadows through forgotten buildings. Except now, the shadow had become me. He looked at me like he recognized something. Not like looking in a mirror, but like seeing an echo you'd buried long ago and hoped would never find you again. I tried to speak, but the older version of me stepped back from the window, as if afraid I'd pull him through. And I couldn't stop staring, because I hadn't just seen time in this place. Time had seen me. The square was different now. The statue of Emilio had shattered. The boy's hands, once outstretched in hope or warning, were gone, replaced by jagged stone stumps. His watch lay on the ground, broken clean in half. No ticking. I walked past it, stepping deeper into the mirror village. And it only grew worse. Every house held remnants of people. Not corpses, but clothes. Cold meals set on rotting tables. Portraits turned to dust. It was like they had once been here, fully alive, then blinked out. Time passed through this version of Montelupo. But not gently. It devoured everything it touched. The chapel stood silent. I stepped inside and found benches collapsed inward, as if the structure had given up its shape. On the altar sat a single object, a candle burned down to the base. Wax crusted in a halo around it, like a grave marker. No flame remained, but something else caught my eye. A sheet of paper, pinned to the wood with a rusted nail. Scrawled in a hand shakier than Rosa's, older than Orso's. This is the version they buried. The one they refused to see. The one where time did not freeze. The one where they paid the price. Beneath it, one word. Balance. A whisper passed through the air vent at the edge of the chapel. Faint, distant, but clear. Time demands balance. The hairs on my arms stood up. I moved to the vent, pressed my ear close. Silence. Then the whisper again, closer this time. You should not have come back. I turned. And there, standing in the doorway of the chapel, was him. But older, eyes wide, face pale, dressed in what looked like torn, dust-covered clothes I recognized from my own pack, gear I hadn't brought, but might have, or once did. He stepped forward slowly, like someone testing the weight of their own shadow. "He shouldn't have come back," he said again. His voice was dry, brittle, and terrified. I tried to speak, but he held up his hand. "They'll see you, if you stay too long." "Who?" I managed to ask. He looked toward the windows, eyes flicking like a man who had learned too late what cannot be unseen. "This place, this version of Montelupo, it's where the loop failed." "Failed?" He nodded. "When the gear turned too far. When the child stopped ticking. The loop collapsed. Time returned. But not gently. It didn't flow back in. It rushed. And it ruined everything." My mind raced. The ghost village. The rotting buildings. The absence of life. What happened to them? The villagers. Most couldn't survive it. They aged centuries in seconds. Turned to bone. Others, they lingered. Long enough to understand what was happening. Long enough to feel it. He stepped closer, and I saw now the scars on his arms. Some old, some fresh, some that looked self-inflicted. I tried to fix it. I thought maybe I could go back, reset the loop, find Rosa, stop myself from entering the tower. But the village won't let me go. His voice cracked. "I'm not a man anymore. I'm a leftover." I asked him what this place truly was, if it was a dream, a reflection, or something worse. He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "It's the version of reality that shouldn't have been. It's the one Montelupo rejected. But because you came back, because you remembered, it remembered you." A noise outside. Scraping. Dragging. Both of us froze. "They're here," he whispered. "Who?" "The others," he said. "The ones who didn't survive. The ones the loop let rot. They walk now. Not alive. Not dead. Just frozen between. They remember what they were. And they hate it." I backed toward the altar. The wind outside picked up, not natural wind, but forced, like breath from a dying god. The windows blackened. "They'll follow you," the older me said. "They'll follow you back up. Because you carry the echo. Because now you know." He stepped back toward the vent. "I'll draw them off," he said. "But if you ever find the true gear, the one beneath the pendulum, don't turn it unless you're ready to trade your life for theirs." And then he was gone. Vanished down the corridor behind the chapel. I stood alone. And then I ran. Back through the gray streets. Back past the statue's rubble. Back toward the spiral stair that had brought me here. But as I climbed, I heard them behind me. Footsteps. What? Shambling. Dozens. Hands reached from the shadows. Faces too long forgotten. Mouths open but silent, screaming in memory alone. I burst into the main chamber of the tower. The gears trembled. The mural now bled black paint. The pocket watches had shattered. And at the very center, where once the sun had watched, there was now a mirror. And in it I saw all versions of myself. Screaming, burning, aging, fading, one by one. And the last one smiled. The bell above me rang. Twice. 3 times. And as I climbed out into Montelupo's surface square, the golden light was still there. Still unmoving. Still warm. But in the corners of the windows, shadows waited. In the town square stands a pendulum that swings between centuries. At midnight it stops. That's when she wakes up. They call her the Oracle of Montelupo. Few speak of her openly. Fewer still have seen her. The villagers lower their voices when her name is mentioned, as if time itself might overhear. Her existence feels less like fact and more like a warning written into the bones of the village, old and trembling, yet somehow immortal. After I escaped the mirror village, haunted by my older self and the echoes that followed, I felt the pull of something deeper. The clock tower was no longer the center. It was just a mechanism, and mechanisms can be built, altered, and broken. But the truth of Montelupo, the soul behind the machinery, the ancient promise that made this place what it is, that lived elsewhere. In the square, I saw her. The pendulum stood beneath the bell tower, not part of it, but emerging from the ground itself, as if the earth had birthed it like a relic too old to bury. It was massive, suspended between two curved iron pillars, etched with stars and moons. The pendulum swung slow and wide, back and forth. Each motion took nearly 30 seconds. Its surface shimmered, but not with light, with memory. On one side, rust and rot. On the other, polish and gleam. Carried time like a secret. At its base, sitting on a stone bench that had fused with the plaza's floor, was a woman. Thin, but wrapped in shawls that whispered as they moved. Her hair was long and silver, cascading down like moonlight, and over her eyes she wore a blindfold of dark linen embroidered with tiny gears. She didn't look at me, but I knew she saw. "I was expecting you," she said. Her voice was ageless, neither young nor old, not kind, not cruel. It simply was like rain, or the sun, or time before it had been touched. "Are you the oracle?" I asked. She tilted her head. "They call me what they need. Once I was a girl, then I was a lover, then I was a clock. Now I am the voice of something older. Older than Montelupo? Older than memory," she said. Her hands rested on her lap. Thin, veined, unmoving, but her fingers were made of brass. No flesh, just brass and wire and springs, ticking softly with each breath. Her eyes, though covered, spun. Beneath the blindfold, something turned. I could hear the grind of gears behind her sockets, slow and patient, as if calculating truths far beyond understanding. "You saw the mirror village," she said. "I did. You saw what time does when it remembers, and what it demands in return." I asked her what Montelupo truly was, why time had stopped, why the people didn't age, why no one could leave. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Because they made a pact." The words fell like ash. "A pact?" I echoed. She nodded. This village, long before it had walls or bells, was a sacred hill, a resting place for forgotten gods, deities older than belief, beings of rhythm, decay, and renewal. And one of them was time. "Time is not a force," she continued. "It is a being. It does not move forward. It chooses to move forward. It breathes. It grows. It waits. And sometimes it listens." She traced a finger along the bench. "When the harvest failed, when the rivers dried, the villagers begged time to stay. Just for a little while. Just long enough to save their children. And time answered? It always does. But it does not give. It trades." The pendulum swung behind her, slower now. "The pact was sealed in blood," she said. 12 chosen. One offering. A circle of watches forged from the bones of the first clockmaker. And a promise that Montelupo would be untouched. Time would not pass. Not here. Not for them. And the price? One death. Every century. Chosen by time. Return to it. She turned her face toward me, and the gears beneath her blindfold stopped. The last death was meant to be Emilio, but he chose another path. My chest tightened. "He became the anchor," I whispered. "Yes," she said, "and the gears have been hungry ever since." She stood then, slowly, as though moving through centuries of weight. Her hands clinked with the sound of metal against stone. Her spine cracked like the turning of a clock's key. She walked toward the pendulum and touched it. It stopped. Utter silence fell. And then, from somewhere far away, the bell tower tolled. "Midnight." The oracle whispered, "Now. I can speak freely." The sky did not darken, though it felt like night. "There is a balance," she said, "between memory and motion, between stillness and story." Montelupo broke that balance when it locked time inside itself. And time has grown impatient. "Why me?" I asked. "Why did Montelupo let me in?" "Because you carry time," she said. "You question it, chase it, document it. Every story you've told, every ruin you've walked, every photo, every whispered legend, it all adds weight to the echo." I looked around the village. Still golden, still perfect, but now I saw the cracks. A child passed by and blinked twice in the same second. A man sipped tea that no longer steamed. A woman hung laundry on a line that hadn't swayed in years. "They're breaking," I said. "They're fading," she corrected, "because nothing can last forever. Not even memory. And the pact still holds, but barely." She turned toward me, blindfolded eyes spinning once more. "You have a choice, Luca. Either you leave, or one of us must die again." I froze. "What do you mean?" She stepped forward. "The cycle must complete." Emilio paused it. "Matteo rewrote it. You might break it. But at what cost?" "Montelupo is a song played on a broken instrument," she said. "Every note, perfect and painful. But if it continues, it will echo into the world beyond." She reached into her shawl and pulled out a small key. "Iron. This opens the chamber beneath the pendulum," she said. "Inside is the true gear, the one that breathes, the one that dreams. Turn it, and Montelupo will either restart or collapse." I stared at the key. Its teeth were jagged. The metal pulsed faintly. "It's alive," I whispered. "Time always is," she said. I took the key. The oracle returned to her bench. The pendulum resumed. And before I turned to leave, she spoke one last time. "If you turn the gear," she said, "don't look back. Time hates regret." And then she closed her eyes. Or the gears did. And I walked away, toward the chamber beneath the square, toward the choice that would either free the village or erase it forever. Everyone else forgot the past, except one man, cursed to remember every lost second. His name was Pietro, and if Rosa was the heart of Montelupo and the oracle its soul, then Pietro was its memory, raw, untamed, too full for one man to bear. I found him, or perhaps he found me, the morning after I left the oracle. The pendulum still swung in the square, casting no shadow. The villagers still walked in the same paths they had followed for centuries. But now I saw them differently, not as people, but as patterns. The same smiles, the same waves, the same gestures, looping over and over like clock hands stuck on the wrong hour. I was walking toward the mayor's hall when I heard the whisper, "Turn around." I did. He stood in a narrow alley, half-shadowed by leaning stone walls, dressed in a long coat that had once been elegant but was now frayed and discolored with time. His face was thin, worn by something deeper than age. But his eyes were impossibly awake, restless, filled with pain and brilliance. And they were watching me not like I was a stranger, but like he knew me. "You're Pietro," I said. He nodded once, then turned and walked into the alley without another word. And I followed, heart-pounding. The corridor opened into a hidden courtyard I hadn't seen before, ivy-choked, littered with broken clocks, photographs, stacks of paper yellowed to near transparency. "This is where memory goes when no one wants it," Pietro said. "Sit." I did. There was nowhere else to go. The wind here felt heavier, filled with the scent of dust, old books, dried fruit, and candle wax. He sat opposite me, reaching for a box that sat under the bench. It was filled with photographs, some black and white, others faded color, a few recent, but all of them unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. "Do you know what happens," he asked, "when you trap time, but forget to trap memory?" I shook my head. He tapped his temple. "It finds someone. Anyone. Usually, someone who didn't belong here to begin with. I was born on the edge of the village, close enough to be caught in the loop, but far enough to remember what existed before it started. I was 5. Now I've lived the same day more times than I can count. And I remember every one." His fingers trembled as he pulled out a journal. "In 1839, he said, I watched my father die. Then the loop reset. He was alive again the next morning. But I remembered. Every second, every sound, every time his breath rattled, every word he tried to say before his chest collapsed." He opened the book. "In 1867, I fell in love with a girl named Clara. She kissed me in the orchard behind the chapel. The next day, she'd never met me. A week later, she kissed someone else, and forgot that too. But I remembered. I always remembered. His voice cracked. In 1901, the baker Johnny slit his throat in the town square. His body bled for hours because no one moved to stop it. No one noticed. Then the clocks ticked once. Reset. He was back behind the counter, smiling. But I remembered. He closed the book. Montelupo doesn't just pause time, he said. It feeds on it. It steals what it needs. From those who wander in. From those who don't belong. From those who question. He looked up at me now, his eyes suddenly burning. And that's why you're here, Luca. You've been here before. You just don't remember. I stared at him, stunned. What are you talking about? He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was brittle, grainy, the edges cracked. On the back, it was dated in neat handwriting, 1923. Piazza di Montelupo. He handed it to me. I turned it over. The image was of the town square. The fountain. The bell tower. 12 villagers stood in a semicircle, all facing the camera. And in the corner, a man, barely visible, stepping into frame, wearing modern clothes. My clothes. It was me. Same face. Same eyes. Same coat. But the photo was from 1923. I dropped it. This can't be real. Pietro picked it back up gently. You came once before, he said. You stayed too long. Montelupo took part of your time. Maybe a year. Maybe a decade. You left with less than you came. It's what the village does. Every traveler who stumbles in here, they lose something. Thus, people. I felt dizzy, cold. But why? To keep the stillness alive. Time must move somewhere, even if it doesn't move here. So it moves through us. Through. You're the fuel. He held up another photo, this one newer. A girl. Blonde. Smiling. Taken from behind. She was with you the first time. I don't know her name. But she stayed. My breath caught. I had flashes. Flickers. A voice I didn't recognize. A laugh in my dreams. A face blurred like a photo smudged by rain. I had forgotten someone. Montelupo had taken her. Pietro stood. Do you know why the oracle still speaks? He asked. Because she surrendered her eyes to time. Their gears now. No longer tied to vision. Just memory. That's what you must understand. Memory is time. It's the only real proof we ever moved forward. I stood too. What do I do? He sighed. You finish the cycle. You find the final gear. The one beneath the pendulum. You turn it, but know this. The moment you do, the village will choose. Choose what? Who stays? He walked to the courtyard's edge, where the light had begun to dim unnaturally. Leave now, he said, and you may forget again. Stay too long, and you'll remember everything, like me. And if I die here? He smiled bitterly. Then you'll never leave, and you'll never forget. That is Montelupo's curse. He handed me one last item, a small watch. Its face was blank. No numbers. No hands. But when I held it, I felt it ticking. Softly, like a heartbeat waiting for a purpose. Go, he said, before you become the next one who remembers. And with that, he disappeared into the shadows of the courtyard. And I was alone, holding a photograph of myself from a century ago, and a watch that didn't show time, but carried it. Somewhere below me, beneath the pendulum, the final gear waited, and I was starting to wonder if I had already turned it once before. My face, in a photo, from 100 years ago. I'd been here before. I couldn't stop staring at it, the faded photograph Pietro had given me, dated 1923. There I was, stepping into the frame, unposed, unaware. My expression was half-turned, as if looking back at something just beyond the camera's lens. The other villagers stood like ghosts frozen mid-breath. But not me. I was moving. The coat, the hair, even the way my fingers curled, it was unmistakable. It was me. But I was born in 1991. That photograph wasn't proof of time travel. It was something worse. It was proof that Montelupo had swallowed me once before, and given me back, bouldered, hollowed, lighter than I should have been. And I didn't even know it. The oracle had warned me. So had Pietro. Time does not just stop in Montelupo, it takes. It rearranges the order of things. Rewrites you gently, like a breeze smoothing words out of sand. But memory, the real kind, clings. It waits. And it returns. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind didn't blow, but something in the air tugged at me, like strings sewn into the fabric of my skin. I walked the quiet streets, eyes catching glimpses of familiar faces. Too familiar. The baker who'd smiled the same way every day since I arrived. The child who dropped her toy at the same cobblestone crack. The woman who walked past with a basket of lemons. Always the same number. Always the same blink. Always the same pace. I wandered to the fountain, its waters still unmoving. The surface reflected the golden sky, never shifting, never flickering. And in the reflection, I saw a boy. Well, dark-haired, but watching me. I turned. No one was there. But the moment I turned back, I remembered. Not all at once. Not like a lightning bolt, but like slow water rising behind a crumbling wall. The first time I came to Montelupo, I was 7. It was summer. My parents had taken me to Italy, a holiday they thought I'd never remember. We passed through a series of quiet villages, chasing legends and quiet roads, my father with a map, my mother with a camera. And one afternoon, they pulled off the road toward a place not listed on any of the guidebooks. A town they swore a local had mentioned. A name that disappeared from their lips the moment we arrived. Montelupo. I remembered the smell of lavender, the shape of the bell tower, the way my mother's watch stopped the moment she stepped out of the car. We only stayed for a few hours, or so they thought. But for me, it was longer. I had wandered off. Into the chapel. Then into the tower. I'd seen something. Or someone. A woman with eyes like turning gears. A boy in a chair. A shadow of myself. And then I was back. They found me by the fountain, asleep. But when they woke me, I cried. I told them I'd been gone for days. They laughed. And I forgot. Until now. I sat at the fountain's edge, shaking, the photo clutched in my hand, and walked to the oracle. She was waiting. Always waiting. You remember, she said before I could speak. I nodded. She tilted her head, the blindfold of woven gears catching the light. You were taken once. And returned. Why come again? I don't know, I said. But I need to understand. What does it mean? She touched the pendulum. It stopped. The bells overhead trembled. Montelupo chooses who it remembers, she said. Not everyone leaves. Not everyone stays. Some return. Not because they are called, but because something in them is unfinished. She stood slowly. There is a rule in places like this, she said. Places born from pacts. From forgotten gods. From time made flesh. The ones who return are the ones who broke something. I looked up. What did I break? She smiled gently. You broke free. She turned toward the square, arms wide. And by returning, you've shattered the silence. Behind her, I heard it. Ticking. One clock. Then another. Then another. All around me, windows opened. Clocks that hadn't moved in 300 years were ticking. I stood. What's happening? She said. You are happening. She placed her hand on my chest. You were the fracture. The loop cracked when you left the first time. Emilio tried to hold it together. Pietro tried to remember. I tried to warn. But none of us could move. Only you could. Why? Because you weren't meant to be here. But Montelupo let you in. And now it wants you back. The ground rumbled. The pendulum began to swing faster. And the sun, once frozen in the sky, dimmed. Just slightly, but enough. Enough to know the end had started. The oracle led me to the base of the pendulum. The stone beneath had begun to crack. And beneath it, barely visible, was a door. The final gear is below, she said. The breath of Montelupo. The peace Matteo hid. The peace Emilio protected. The peace Pietro remembers. And if I turn it? I asked. Then the choice must be made. What choice? She looked at me, her face grave. Yours or theirs. The door creaked open, and from the depths below, I heard the sound I hadn't heard since I first arrived. Actual wind, breathing, movement, the sound of time returning. The oracle whispered, "You can leave, walk away, and forget again. But Montelupo will stay, waiting, feeding, growing hungrier. Or you finish the loop." And what happens then? She stepped back into shadow. That's not for me to know. I stood at the edge of the descent, Pietro's photograph still burning in my pocket, the ticking growing louder, the faces in the windows watching. Watching me, the man who had left, the boy who had broken free. And as the clocks ticked louder, I knew they were all ticking for me. Time has two choices: collapse or consume. The machine must be wound one final time. The oracle's words echoed in my mind as I descended into the chamber beneath Montelupo's square, deeper than the mirror village, deeper than the watchmaker's home, deeper than even the ghost of Emilio's heartbeat. Stone gave way to iron, iron gave way to dust. The walls narrowed, breathed, and then widened into a place that shouldn't exist, a space that felt stitched between centuries, between now and never. The path ended at a circular platform, ringed by gears the size of carousels. Each one moved by the faintest breath of motion, not mechanical, but biological. You didn't hear these gears. You felt them, like echoes beneath your ribs. They weren't machines. They were memories made metal. And at the center stood the lever. The simple thing, really. A rusted iron handle planted into the stone. It stood alone with no wires, no counterweights, no wheels visibly attached. But it thrummed with power. And as I stepped toward it, the chamber shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. The way rooms do when a secret is about to reveal itself. The temperature didn't drop, but my skin prickled. The air didn't thicken, but I felt the weight of centuries settle onto my shoulders. I stood at the lever, Pietro's watch in my pocket, the oracle's key dangling from my neck, the ghost of my own photograph still flashing behind my eyes. My fingertips brushed the handle, and I felt them. All of them. The people above. The villagers. Still walking. Still smiling. Still living the same moment. But something was different now. They were waiting. The clocks had begun to tick again. First slowly, then with certainty. The pendulum in the square now swung faster. Time had tasted motion once more, and it wanted more. But Montelupo, the machine, the spirit, the memory, needed a choice. Restart the loop, or end it. If I pulled the lever, the cycle would reset. Time would flow again. The sky would darken. The sun would rise and set. People would age. The village would decay. But the price? Someone would have to take Matteo Verano's place. Someone would become the new anchor, the pulse beneath the stillness, forever conscious, forever forgotten, sealed in this chamber, while the world above moved on. I would become the echo that kept the clocks turning. I could destroy, rip the lever from its roots, and free time completely. But the cost of that would be even greater. Every soul bound to the loop, Rosa, Pietro, the oracle, the laughing children who never aged, the villagers who had smiled the same smiles for generations, they would vanish. Because they were not part of time anymore. They were its memory, its echo. If time flowed again without the loop, they wouldn't return to life. They would dissolve. And Montelupo would become a ruin, a forgotten name on a crumbling map. I stood at the lever and felt the weight of both futures pressing down on me like twin hands. I thought of Rosa, of how her eyes glimmered when she spoke of her brother, of Pietro, who remembered every death and every love that never happened, of the oracle, who had watched without eyes for centuries, of Emilio, whose heartbeat swung beneath the bell tower like a prayer trapped in a pendulum. They had all lived inside this breath for so long. But was it really living? I took a deep breath, and then I heard her voice. Behind me. Luca. I turned. Rosa stood at the edge of the chamber. Still young. Still dressed in the same woven shawl. But her expression had changed. No more mystery. No more dreamy stillness. Just a quiet sorrow. You shouldn't be here, I said. She smiled faintly. I've always been here. She stepped forward. The light from the chamber gears flickered against her skin, casting shadows across her face like passing centuries. You came back to fix us, she said. To understand. To remember. And now, she said, you know the truth. Montelupo was never a sanctuary. It was a cage. The soft one, yes. Made of memory and kindness and golden light. But a cage nonetheless. She looked at the lever. You don't have to do this, I said. I know, she said. But you do. She stepped beside me, looked down at the lever, her voice softer now. We were meant to die long ago. I met her eyes. What happens if I let go? She didn't answer right away, but I saw it in her face. Release. And grief. And peace. I miss forgetting, she said. I didn't know what else to say. There are no words for that kind of sorrow. The sorrow of living too long, of remembering too much, of never getting to forget the ones you've lost, because they never left, but also never truly stayed. The silence around us grew. And then I asked, will I remember you? If you become the anchor, she said, you'll remember everything. And if I destroy it? Then I'll remember you, just for a moment, just long enough to disappear. Her hand brushed mine. Not memory, not illusion. And then she stepped back. I stood alone again, one hand on the lever, the other trembling. Two choices, fit or destroy. Time doesn't beg, it doesn't plead, it doesn't cry. But in that chamber, with the gears whispering and the ghosts waiting, it felt like it did. I closed my eyes and made my decision. Just before I pulled the lever, the bells rang. Not one, not two, but 12. And the village above exhaled for the first time in 323 years. It happened quickly, quicker than Luca ever imagined. A flick of the lever, a breath that didn't quite finish. And then the air itself, shivered. The ancient gears beneath Montelupo's time tower groaned as if the earth had aged all at once. Dust danced in slow spirals, falling like snow in the stale chamber. Somewhere beneath his boots, a crack formed, thin at first, like a scratch on glass, then widened, spread, twisted. And the silence shattered. Then it ticked. The sound was gentle, almost kind. A child's music box winding to life. But the force of it? The world reeled. The clocks began to hum in their long-dead voices, chiming not in unison but in agony, as though they had waited centuries just for permission to weep. Luca stumbled backward as the entire tower shifted, stone joints grinding against each other like rusted bones waking from slumber. Light spilled through the tower windows, not daylight, but something older, something pale and silver and pulsing like the heartbeat of time itself. Outside, the fog peeled back. It didn't drift away. It evaporated as if it had never belonged. The cobblestones of Montelupo cracked with the sound of bones snapping. Moss withered, vines blackened, shutters slammed open to reveal hollow houses, and one by one, the ageless villagers began to change. Rosa was the first. She had been walking toward the tower, holding her gold pocket watch like it was a child in her arms. When the tick echoed out, she stopped. Her body faltered. Her shoulders sagged. And then, in front of Luca's eyes, she aged. Not slowly, not gently, but with every step she had never taken. Wrinkles carved her face like runes, her hair lost its shape and fell like threads of brittle light. Her hands curled like parchment, and then she crumbled. Not into dust, not into nothing, but into memory. And memory, Luca now understood, is time's most faithful servant. Others followed. Pietro, the man who remembered everything, smiled as the burden lifted from his mind. His final act was to whisper one name, a name Luca would never know, and then he was gone. The oracle's eyes, long spinning with gears, stopped cold. She sat upon the pendulum's base like a queen dismissing her throne, and when the second tick struck, yes, a second one, faint and echoing, she vanished, robes folding in on themselves like smoke. The town aged in seconds. Stone cracked, roofs collapsed. Ivy that had once clung for centuries turned to ash. Statues wept dust. And yet, amidst the ruin, Luca stood unharmed and wholly alone. The time tower had emptied. Its glow dimmed. The mechanism beneath him slowed to a murmur. And then, the clock stopped again. All but one. The watch in Luca's hand. It had once belonged to Rosa. He hadn't meant to take it, but when her body fell, it had rolled across the floor, stopping at his feet. Now it's ticked. Only his. Frozen at 1:01. He left Montelupo in silence. No roads looped this time. No repeating villagers smiled the same smile. The world beyond had not waited. It had forgotten. He drove. Slept in abandoned barns and hollow inns. Months passed, or maybe days. It was hard to tell. The weight of what he had done pressed against his chest not like guilt, but like gravity, because he had freed them. And yet, something inside him remained tethered. He returned to his apartment in Florence, where the noise of modern life felt like an insult. The hum of neon, the click of elevators, the scroll of endless digital time. It all seemed brittle now. Like pretending. The guys. He put Rosa's watch on his nightstand. It ticked once. At 1:01. Every night. And then stopped again. And when he listened closely, really listened, he could hear a sound that no machine made. Breathing. Not his own. Montelupo still lived. Somehow, somewhere. Not in maps. Not in memories. But in time itself. He began to see things. Not ghosts, reflections. Of villagers in mirrors that weren't there. Of a boy staring at him from puddles, holding a watch. Of the oracle's blind eyes watching from passing trains. Once, he saw his older self again. In a shop window, aged 20 years. Staring back. Nodding. Every clock he owned broke. His phone refused to hold time. Watches shattered on his wrist. The only constant was Rosa's, always ticking once. At 1:01. Then one night at exactly 1:01 a.m., Luca woke to find the watch gone. In its place, a note. 3 words, scribbled in ink that shimmered silver in the moonlight. Time remembers you. He didn't sleep again. He didn't need to, because Montelupo, the village where time stood still, had never really stopped. It had only paused, waiting, watching, preserving the breath between before and after. And Luca? He had become its echo, its keeper. He walks the streets now, sometimes at dawn, sometimes at dusk, always wearing a coat a bit too old for him, his hair touched with gray he swears wasn't there yesterday. And those who meet him, tourists, travelers, wanderers, they say there's something strange in his voice. A way he talks about time like it's a river he swam in, a forest he walked through. Some even say he gives directions to a place that doesn't exist on the map. A village tucked between 2 hills in Tuscany. Montelupo, where no one ages, where clocks forget to tick, where, if you listen closely, you'll hear it. Just one tick, just enough. And if you hear it, it's already too late. I left Montelupo, but part of me is still there. Whenever I look at the clock, it skips a beat, just enough to remind me, time remembers. When the last echo fades, when the dust of forgotten clocks settles, and when you finally step away from Montelupo, ask yourself, did time let you go? Or are you still caught between its gears, one tick away from remembering something you've always known? Because some places don't vanish. They wait. In old paintings, in dreams that skip, in stories passed down in hushed tones over candlelight. And in you, if you've listened this far, then perhaps time has already marked you. If this tale stirred something inside, a memory that doesn't belong, a shadow that never leaves at noon, a town you've never visited but somehow recall, then this is not the end. It's only the beginning. We tell stories for those who listen with more than just ears, for those who feel the hum beneath history, who chase the ghosts that linger in stone, who believe that even the past holds its breath when truth is spoken aloud. So if your heart still echoes with Montelupo's silence, then follow it. Like this video if it found a place in your mind. Share it with someone who still believes in forgotten towns and ticking truths. Leave a comment, tell us what you remember. And most of all, subscribe, because the next story may already be unfolding. Not in the future, not in the past, but in that quiet space in between, where time waits and stories never truly end.